But now I don't see another button that says like go live and broadcast, but
I've got an orange panel at the top of mine that says practice mode only. Attendees cannot join until you broadcast, and then it's got a broadcast button.
no, I don't have that. So you may be the one that has to broadcast at like 5 till.
Okay.
I see it's recording. Is that right?
Yeah, I just started it up again. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
You're not recording this, are you?
We're going to record it. Don't you think we should?
A little Fletch reference, Jesse.
It's still early. Let's see. Yeah, so you have a little orange thing up there that says
What did?
practice mode, huh?
I was saying I'd have thought Jesse had been up since 5, running like 10 miles.
I did. I was out on the streets at like 6:30 this morning.
So what is all this early talk?
I mean, my brain is still like, you know, it was just an excuse, honestly. There is nothing to it.
Dave, show the guitar. It was a good touch.
Well, so listen to this. I would like to be in my other room where I have our little mini basketball hoop, but our marketing person said that it should be in my son's room, and this is my son's like little mini guitar. I'm musically incompetent, so
yeah. Catherine told me she helped you pick out the room and the backdrop.
Yeah. She's like, "Oh, that looks cool." I'm like, "All right, whatever."
I love the guitar.
Yeah. Well, my father-in-law is like, I mean, if he started singing, you couldn't tell him and Elvis apart. But he's a huge fan of music, and so he's just, you know, kind of pushing that on the kids, get them going.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Gene, we'll go live at 5 till.
Okay.
How's that sound?
That sounds amazing.
That's great.
And then what time do we want to actually start rolling with things?
What do you think, Gene? You're the pro here.
I think right at 10.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it's live before it's live.
Mm-hmm.
Or an experiment. You know, it's fine.
Yeah, I think that one of the charming things about this is that it's not super scripted and like overly produced.
Yeah.
Hey Don.
Hey, are we there?
No.
Yep. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Overly scripted.
Well, you're supposed to be overly scripted.
It's not a script. It's just, I realized there were a lot of things to take care of at the beginning.
You're moderately scripted, literally.
I added polls to
Get that out of your system.
Paul, does yours have a thing that says polls at the bottom or just Q&A?
I saw Q&A. Let me see. It says polling, yeah.
Oh, yours says polling too. Hold on. So let me try to.
Why don't I sign out and sign back in and see if that flips control of it to you, because I can't be doing that while I'm moderating.
Okay. Well, let me pull out too and go back in, because I don't think it's going to do that. So.
Okay. All right. So I'll come back in like 2 minutes if you come back immediately.
lighting on this camera looks weird. Does it look weird? It doesn't look like this yesterday. It looks dark. Is that true for you guys too?
It looks good. Did you do the I don't know what it's called, but like make things look better mode on Zoom?
No, how do I do that?
There is
I
a-
want that for my life.
yeah, that's funny. So there's a under your settings,
Yeah.
there's a little thing that basically says like make things look better or something to that effect.
Mhm.
Clearly I haven't used it yet, but it's there.
Hey, Jesse,
Yeah.
I noticed as I was trying to leave, because I'm the host,
Yeah.
I couldn't leave without ending the meeting.
So that is really strange. I just went and checked that I'm also a host, and I don't have any of the.
Down at the
I
bottom.
have Q&A, but I don't have any of the controls that
Are y'all co-hosts?
we're supposed to be.
You're not noted as a host on my list of panelists.
That
I think
is
if you go to preferences
okay.
on the status bar and you go to, let's see, what is it? Is that it? What's up, LG? Sorry, Jesse. I thought that was it.
That is like yesterday when I did the practice session, I had all of the correct controls here.
I don't know. As you're figuring that out, if Dawn on preferences, if you go to
Yeah.
video, there's something called touch up my appearance. It might make it a little brighter.
I did that. I just think it might be too much light.
Yeah, I think yesterday you had it like angled a little bit or something, and it could be that bright light behind you. But
I think that's
Not
what it is. No, I think it's the door right behind you.
the door.
So, Paul, maybe when you go live, I will somehow have
That's in
Those-
60 seconds.
ability as well.
Can I make a suggestion, Jesse, that given where we are, we say we'll do polling starting next week?
Yeah, unless they magically pull up on my thing. But
Yeah. My brain's too small to manage all these things.
okay, I'm gonna leave and try going in one more time. But otherwise, that sounds good.
Okay, I'll wait for you and then I'll start the broadcast.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna leave my video off because I'm just background noise here. Okay, well,
Are you back?
yeah.
Hello.
So Dawn, I saw you studied at Georgia Tech.
Hey, Janet.
Yes. For my master's and doctorate, yes.
I get to call you doctor. My wife teaches at Kennesaw State, so I know how important all those things are.
The interesting thing is with students, though, because in design, we often are so collaborative and team-based, and I'm trying to prepare my students more for when they are in practice. Everybody just calls me Dawn. I don't ask them to call me Dr. Haney, because it sets up a hierarchy, and since most of our studios are more collaborative and less lecture-based, at least what I teach, it just feels more appropriate. I mean, I have students who have a hard time with it, and so some of them will still call me Dr. Haney, but
I'm gonna call you Dr. Haney today. just to lift the esteem of this panel. All right, guys, I'm gonna hit the broadcast now, so people will start joining now. David, you do your own makeup then, huh?
I do, I guess so. I got addicted to chapstick when I was up in upstate New York, this like medicated chapstick. I know it's an addiction. I just can't stop doing it.
Oh, really?
Right. Jenna, how are you?
Hey, I am doing well. I'm always glad it's Friday. Friday mornings. Friday mornings always feel good, regardless of what your weekly routine was that week, I tell you.
It's true.
How have you been doing?
Doing well. Didn't sleep great last night. We'll see how many cylinders I'm firing on.
Yeah, I was on a 6.5-hour Zoom call yesterday, and by the time it was over, I think I didn't even realize how tired I was. I went over and sat down on the sofa, and the next thing I knew, I was sound asleep.
Next thing you know, it's Friday morning.
Yeah.
No, my husband came by and woke me up a little while later, and he's like, yeah, I was like, oh, I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep.
I feel like a computer should be required to explode after like 2 or 3 hours of a Zoom call. Just automatically explode.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. That would be a good.
I think that would be a good, like, fundamental lesson or law.
Yeah. Because after a while, you're just in this overload mode. I think that's what happened to me when I went over and sat on the sofa and just like went to sleep. It was like my brain was just going, shut down for a minute. I'm tired.
Yeah.
Tired of all this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I go to sleep after that. So then I slept on the sofa, right? So I had this little like mini. And it totally messed me up for going to bed. So then I can't claim I didn't get any sleep, Gene, like you, but then I stayed up super late because I didn't want to go back to bed.
I think my problem was drinking a bunch of coffee and watching Netflix till 1 a.m.
The coffee.
It's a hunch.
Huh?
What's the show? What's the show?
I've been getting into the Ken Burns documentaries this
Oh, yeah.
this era. The Lewis and Clark one's unbelievable, by the way. Just saying.
Yeah. I haven't seen that, but I'm pretty big on documentaries myself. So I love the national parks.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For those watching who are, there are probably like 70 people right now. This is it, right? We're going to talk about sleeping and Ken Burns.
Our habits of watching TV and sleeping habits. Yeah.
Michael Jordan documentary is out. That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm 100% going down the well on every single sports documentary that there is, trying to make it as real as possible into some sort of actual sporting event. I watched the entire. There's one on Amazon about cricket, and so I did a bunch of research on how cricket scores, and I watched all of it. That's the depth that I'm at for sports addiction.
You're actually able to figure it out?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I got there. There's different. It's tough because there's like different formats. It's kind of like rugby. There's like different formats. The same team will play different formats, and there's different scoring in those formats, and it's wild. But yeah, I'll sink my teeth into anything at this point of its sports.
Yeah. We'll go out there and meet the pitch sometime.
All right.
All right, Jesse, I just saw your message. That's great. So can we tell who all?
We have polls.
All right, we're going to wait one more minute, I think. Start at 10:02.
Dawn, what are you watching?
Ironically, I'm reading.
Hmm.
So, my kids are binging on everything Netflix that's possible, and finding all kinds of new shows. But I have found that I need to there's so much, I'm an introvert, and so there's so much activity now in my house because we have 3 children. And so I'm finding that I need to squirrel away in a corner and read to not go insane. So it's been kind of fun. I'm currently, ironically, reading the book Quiet by Susan Cain. I'm almost finished with that. It's been, I have this stack of books that I've wanted to look at and haven't yet. So just kind of making my way through those.
Nice.
Okay, so should we get started?
Yeah.
Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Hey everyone, my name is Paul Pendergrass. I am a writer and business consultant based here in Atlanta, Georgia, and love having the opportunity to moderate this panel, which we are calling The City in Which We Live, which is specifically going to focus on the impact of the global pandemic on what we build and how we build it. I want to start by thanking TVS Design, Janet Simpson and Jesse Altman for pulling this together. And it looks like we've got a panel that's very representative of all the different dimensions of the built world. And it looks like our attendees are also a good representation of all the different things that go into the built environment: architecture, design, construction, commercial real estate, development, and lots of people that have worked in multiple facets of that. So we're going to do 3 of these. This is episode 1 out of 3 each Friday. And because there is so much that's been coming at us, we thought it would be good to focus each of the episodes on a specific phase or dimension of the pandemic and its implications. So today's episode 1, is going to be focused on reflecting on what we've seen and what's important and what we've learned over the last 6 weeks. So it's sort of taking stock of taking a minute to stop and look back and say, wow, what's most interesting to me and the experiences I've had in the last 6 weeks relative to what we build and how we build it. Next Friday, we'll move forward a little bit and we'll focus on the road to reopening and recovery. We came up with this agenda before we knew the state of Georgia would be jumping the gun for us, but so I'm sure a lot's going to transpire between now and then, but I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And then finally, the episode that I think a lot of us are looking forward to the most is focusing on the long-term future and what's going to be different. We keep hearing that we won't be going back to normal, or that there will be a new normal or a new state of being. But what does that actually mean to those of us who work in and around the whole built environment process? After we're going to get our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll do about 30 minutes of commentary from them. And then after that, we're going to open it up to your questions, which you can submit through the chat function. Jesse's also going to be doing a little bit of polling as the conversation rolls along, so we'd love for you to participate in that. So I'll go ahead and introduce or have the panelists introduce themselves. We've got 6 really smart people who aren't just smart, but they've got a lot of different interesting experiences, and they're very savvy about the subject we're talking about today. So I'm going to ask each of them to give you a little bit of background on who they are, and then just maybe a sentence on what interested them in participating in this conversation. So I want to start with Gene, Kansas. Can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much to TVS for hosting, for bringing us all together. I think that's really one of the great parts of this time in our lives, is this ability to share this kind of hopeful silver lining of solidarity and continued solidarity. I am coming to you all from Constellations, our civic, social, cultural-based workspace in Auburn Avenue, from the North Star Library. I am a cultural developer, and from New Orleans, so I like fried shrimp, and that's me.
Great. Lawrence Gellerstadt, president of South Source Advisors. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so born and raised in Atlanta. I like to say 4th generation Atlantan. Family goes way back, especially in the built environment in this city. And so obviously that's really been my calling. I tried to stay away from real estate in my education, and just came back to it anyway. And then I was at WeWork for the last 2 years, Cushman before that, and started South Source probably 3 weeks before all this started. And so been a wild ride. It's going to be a great story, but certainly what has interested me in this panel is not only the content, but the people involved, Gene and Jesse and Paul, and the rest of the panelists, just great people. And in this time, it's really all that matters is your relationships and the right people. And so great panel to be a part of, and coming to you from Kirkwood, from my office. And I like Chick-fil-A like any good Atlantan.
Let's meet Dr. Dawn Haney, who's a professor at Georgia State and also a researcher and practicing designer.
Yeah, thanks. So I teach at Georgia State University, and I teach graphic design, interior design, and I'm affiliate faculty with our Urban Institute. And I have looked at the scale of many different environments, from the interior through architecture and into the urban, and really try to understand all the impacts of those environments on our behavior, and how we really can support better design.
Fantastic. David Nelson, who's a senior vice president at Carter. David, are you there?
Yeah, everyone, thanks for tuning in and listening today. We really excited about this, and I work for Carter USA. We own a couple large projects right now, one at Summerhill alongside of Georgia State, and another one at the Met right in town, and also actually at Morehouse School of Medicine. But we're a 60-year-old development company here in town, and I'm coming here right now from my son's bedroom. It's the quietest place I could find in the house.
And finally, thanks, David. And finally, our sponsor, Janet Simpson, who is president of TVS Design here in Atlanta. Janet?
Well, like I said, I'm Janet with TVS Design, and TVS Design is a 50-plus-year-old Atlanta-based architecture and interior design firm on commercial architecture and interiors. And I am the current president of TVS Design, but I haven't always held that role at TVS. I actually came to TVS Design in 2007 to work in their workplace interiors studio, because that is my background, as I'm a workplace interior designer, and held that role until 2017, when I became president and took on this role. And I'm coming to you from the suburbs, Alpharetta. I'm sitting in my home in Alpharetta. And I'm also, since we've talked about food and things that we like from where we are, I'm originally from Montgomery, Alabama. And obviously I must be having a baseline of stress during this environment, because I have gone back to all of my Southern roots in cooking. I've done fried chicken and pulled pork and all of the things all those comfort foods I love, because but Chick-fil-A is also a big into that too, Lawrence. Yeah.
Thanks, Janet. So thanks, everyone, and we're really glad you're here. As we said, today's program or today's episode is going to be focused on reflecting on what we've seen over the last 6 weeks. And we've seen a lot of commentary, all of us see probably too much commentary, and everything seems to change every day. But I haven't seen that much that is actually focused on what we build and how we build it. And so I wanted to tap into the collective brain power and observational powers of this group by asking you, of all the stuff you've seen, what have you found most compelling, particularly as it relates to how people and spaces and buildings relate to each other? Lawrence, you had some really interesting thoughts yesterday when we talked briefly. You want to start us off?
Love to. Always love going first. So yeah, I mean, what comes to mind for me, most especially because it seems to be universal across different stakeholders, and the ones that I interact with the most are tenants, landlords, and lenders. And that interaction, has a deep history of working in a very similar way. And tenants come to the landlord, they have a need, landlord gets it approved by the lender, and everybody's sort of trying to protect themselves. And I think over the last, 6 weeks, what stood out the most is just how universal this crisis is across geography and across industry in a way that we've never seen. And I think one of the things that I take away that's been really positive is just whether it's because that's required or whether that's because at the core behind all the negotiation, it's what we really are. But there's been really an unprecedented amount of partnership. Landlord's willingness to work with the tenant that has a need, and then the lender's willingness to work with the landlord in that same regard. And I think, that's been really, really positive. And quite frankly, it's really the only option as tenants and landlords and lenders work together, knowing that the only way out of this is to find solutions for everyone, because, the landlords can't find a bunch of new tenants, and the lenders aren't going to find that there's a big difference between owners. So I think this unprecedented level of partnership, willingness to work with each other, knowing that however we get through it, whatever businesses thrive, we're all going to have to change our attitudes and work together to get out of this thing has been really my biggest takeaway.
So this new sense of partnership that you just mentioned, is that driven by just a collective fear that there's going to be a glut of space out there, or what's driving it?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think, like I said, there's sort of two ways to look at it. One is that there's a fear of the glut of space, and nobody knows how best to fill it. So let's stick with the tenants that we have. I like to think that realistically, everybody's dealing with the same uncertainty, and we're all being fair to each other. Lenders don't know what their assets are worth right now. Asset values haven't stabilized, and so nobody really knows what they're holding. In the same way, the tenants don't know what kind of business is going to come back and what's not. And so I think while there's this period of uncertainty, the more positive way to look at it, which is the way I choose to look at it, is just these people are working together because no one knows what they have. And we're going to try and wait till some certainty comes together, and we're not going to abandon each other while there's a ton of uncertainty.
Right. Anybody want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in just to add on to what Lawrence is saying. I mean, I think to answer your question, Paul, it's also just a difference between short-term and long-term thinking. You know, short-term, it's bad, it hurts, but it's hurting everybody. And when you think about long-term, and, you know, as a company that we've been in Atlanta for 60 years, Lawrence just talked about decades of, you know, family generational being in Atlanta. Long-term, I know we certainly believe this at Carter, that value is really created through relationships. And so diving in to relationship and focusing on the relationships, deal is successful long-term, that, I mean, we're here for a long period of time. And so working together, you know, to us is really kind of the right way to do it.
David, how explicit has that been in your conversations? Do people openly talk about long-term versus short-term, or is it just implied?
Yeah, no, it is explicit. I mean, as soon as this happened, I mean, within a week, I would say, you know, the first week was, okay, we've got a week of, I'm going to teach my son how to ride a bike, and, you know, we've got a little bit of a vacation. And then it's like, wow, this thing is really going to settle in, and we're going to be here a while. I mean, we immediately started moving in two ways. And as a developer, so as a landlord, we're kind of stuck in this middle of managing relationships with our fiduciary relationships with our partners and our lenders and our equity partners, but then also with our tenants, and everyone's being affected. And so we immediately within that week were, you know, writing update reports to our partners, calling them and saying, this is what we think is coming and where it could go. And on the same token, turning and calling our retailers. And some of our retailers were businesses. You take Little Bear, who's a restaurant at Summerhill. They'd opened a week and a half before the crisis hits. So you got restaurateurs literally on the front lines, just opening a business for the first time, and they're severely impacted, and there's a massive amount of fear. So we immediately had discussions with them about what is April going to look like, and what are we going to do for you in April so that you can calm those fears and move forward. And now, you know, within, I guess, this last week, we're already having conversations with tenants about May and June. And then how do we really, you know, set them up? Because the reality here is, you know, we have several months more ahead of us, and then recovery after that. Like, when are people going to, like, who's going to feel really good about getting in an elevator tomorrow, and those kind of things.
Yeah. And when you mentioned fear out there, how pronounced is that? How are people panicking? Are they hanging in there? What's the vibe?
Well, and, you know, Gene talks to this a lot when we were all talking the other day, but it gets to the sensibilities of individuals, right? I mean, some people are naturally more anxious, some aren't. Some businesses are set up to handle this, some really aren't. And so we've got some businesses that have just closed because, you know, Woods Chapel's producing, I mean, in order for them to open a restaurant, they have to produce a massive amount of food and smoke it, and it takes a full day. I mean, it's a huge operation versus another to-go business where it's a little bit more made to order. And there's business differences, but then there's sensibilities. You know, some just how they grew up or where they are looking at it and going, will people ever even go back out to eat? And, you know, or will it be next year? Whereas others would say it might be this fall. So it really, I mean, there's fear kind of all across. There's uncertainty everywhere. And then I think the levels of fear vary depending on the person in the business.
Right. Dawn, what are your thoughts?
So one of the things that, you know, so I study history, but in asking us to think about this last 6 weeks, one of the things that has struck me is really sort of our means of adapting our space so quickly, and letting it be multifunctional and multi-purpose. And so if you think about how we design, we often spend an enormous amount of time trying to talk with our clients and understand the functions that they need support for. So we go through a, you know, spatial analysis and ask, you know, what do you do in your space? And basically, how do you work? Where do you work? And in the educational institutions, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do you teach? And is it lecture? Is it collaboration? Is it team-based? And then we go about designing spaces really specifically for those functions. And then in research, we spend a lot of time then measuring the effects of the characteristics of space on that productivity and performance. So for example, does the size of the space matter? Is the visibility matter? How flexible does it need to be? You know, how much natural light is there? And then we use all that research to then again put it into a very specific function, and a specific design for a specific space. And so within these last 6 weeks, we've been forced to move, and even our homes, right? Our homes have also been designed for specific functions, but we've been forced to turn our homes into, in my case, 2 offices, because both my husband and I are working from home, and I have 3 classrooms, because I have 3 children, 3 different ages, in 3 different schools. And so we've had to take our house and turn it into this multifunctional, multi-purpose space, almost like we talk about in, you know, current workplace strategies, in terms of thinking about how do you find and carve out focus space? How do you find and carve out collaboration space? And how do we turn the dining room into an office, right? And how do we find, you know, acoustic privacy? All those things that we think about in design and research, we're now having to apply to the house. And I think some houses and some forms are more adaptable to these different kinds of functions. For example, your older homes that have more compartmental type rooms seem to be more adaptable to this. And the larger, more contemporary open floor plans, I think you're seeing a lot, or at least I'm seeing a lot of frustration because people aren't able to find ways to make it work, and for this many, many different kinds of functions that we're needing throughout the day. And so I just find that really interesting, and seeing the parallels for what we research, and then how do we find that best balance when we design tomorrow.
So do you have a sense yet whether the experience you're having in terms of evaluating your home and its functionality is going to influence how you go back and do other spaces?
Absolutely. And I will think about the flexibility. And I know that we've had these conversations in education in terms of trying to be more flexible in the classroom and how it could be more multifunctional. And the same is true for our office. But you start thinking about, I think we just ran a poll, and almost 70% of the people here haven't worked from home more than 1 day a week. And so if we think about how this moves forward, it's going to impact how we design our homes and how we really think about carving out different kinds of space, and how flexible and resilient can we be.
Janet, your thoughts?
Well, you know, the last 6 weeks have been absolutely thought altering, I guess, for me, because I've had to go through so many different phases of changes. And the first one was that, of course, moving everyone out of our office. March 13th was the last day we were all in the office together. And the quick ability for us to make a decision that says we really have got to go to 100% virtual environment. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, honestly, at how quick and easily we did that. And part of my surprise was going back to some of this. Everyone seems to be rallying around the most important thing, which was understanding that our health, you know, and safety was at risk. Because normally, if I had made a declaration like, everybody, we're going to go home and work, nobody come in the office. Yeah, there are almost 200 people, and they're all very opinionated people, and I would have had some pushback from some people, you know, and that was the one time that everybody was like breathing a sigh of relief, like, oh, thank you, we don't have to go back to the office, you know, thank you, we can work from home. And then the next thing was, after we dealt with that, was also trying to understand with our clients. Let's make sure that our clients know that we can still, we're moving out of the office, but we're still going to be able to serve them. And what all of a sudden changes about the projects we might be working on that are on the boards? What does this change about those projects? And then the next wave that hit me was, as a workplace interiors designer with my background, and then also running a company now, for the first time, I think I truly understood that the most important thing to our business was what type of digital platform we were sitting on, not our physical space. It was, we actually have this whole suite of tools that is about the digital workplace. And that's the most important thing to our business continuity. And then the question is, okay, so what do I need this office space for? What is it that we can't accomplish with our technology platform that we're sitting on that I need this office space for? And we're constantly asking those questions. And now that everyone has gotten accustomed to this, it's getting to be a bigger and bigger question. It's like, well, what do you need the office for? And what is it that's going to make you feel comfortable to come back? So it's been a really interesting evolution, but I do think that this idea that we're all rallying around, there's such a central understood thing of why we're looking at our behavior and why we're changing it, that is what's so powerful in it.
Jean, you've talked about approaching these last 6 weeks like an anthropologist. Talk about that.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's obviously this theme of relationships here, relationships of people. Lawrence and David talked about the major stakeholders within commercial real estate, and Dawn talked about this relationship between home, office, school, clients. Janet's talking about, this relationship of leadership, and all of that obviously includes people. And I've had this philosophy for a long time that if you're on the planet, you're in real estate. I'm specifically in commercial real estate development, so historic preservation, adaptive reuse, and others. When I say on the planet, being in real estate, that's because we're all sharing the earth. And there's that relationship. We all, I think at its most ideal, need to be or want to be or have to be considerate of others, consider others, and how we're working together. So when I'm thinking about these relationships from this anthropological point of view, I'm thinking about the people and how we're interacting with each other even. I'm loving Atlanta, like that was an early theme on this call. We love Atlanta. I'm loving Atlanta because there's no traffic in Atlanta right now. I'm loving Atlanta because in 25 years, I've never seen the weather be this good. Of course, I have concerns about, people's well-being. But I have to think like we as Atlantans have this relationship with traffic, right? We're not having to deal with that right now. How, when, what are we going to be dealing with in our city is, I think, critically important. In fact, like this morning, I woke up and I was thinking about shaking hands. Like no one wants to go shake anyone's hand right now. And that's okay, it's understood. When we come back, how is that going to work out? Because shaking hands is it's like some type of promise. It's a demonstration of trust. It's something that's cordial. And when you're making a deal, let's say with a landlord or a tenant, or you're, welcoming a colleague back, or, congratulating a student at the end of the semester, like how is that going to happen? And I really could take this in so many ways. What's really the most fascinating about all of it, though, is that there is this incredibly conspicuous and incredibly sped up version of evolution, which is going on every second of the day, since, there was life or even the planet starting. But how we're seeing the adaptation that Dawn's talking about, the adaptation in commercial real estate that LG and David talk about, the adaptations of leadership, that to me is really the most fascinating. How we're adapting. And in evolution, you adapt to the specific environment you find yourself in, you become a dinosaur. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of dinosaurs. We need to figure out how we can work together, like we're all talking about, and how we can adapt for this specific environment. And because the environment is changing so quickly, it makes it quite a challenge.
You talking about evolution, Dawn. You've looked at history a lot, and everybody says we've never had anything like this. Are there similar periods from history you think that are or not?
Yes, I think that there are similar, or at least lessons that we can learn, or we have learned, right? So in design, we have an outbreak or a pandemic with cholera or any other public health diseases, right? And we adapt and we change our buildings and our cities and our water source and our infrastructure. We've had fires and change our building codes. We have hurricanes and earthquakes, and those change our building codes. So we certainly have had challenges. And in recent history, right? So in China, they've had or at least Asia, right? We've had SARS, we've had SARS and MERS, sorry. And I've been currently trying to call through that research to see what is lasting. They're still building cities, they're still building with density. We still have a need for community, but there are things that we can learn in terms of and apply in this current situation as we move forward.
Is there any chance we're overestimating the importance of this moment in history?
No, I don't think that we are. I think that it is real. But I don't think there's a reason to panic. I think that we are certainly very able to adapt and to learn from this. Will there be a new challenge? Of course there will be, and we'll adapt and we'll learn to that as well. And we've not just had pandemics with public health or natural disaster. We've had economic challenges. We will get through this. I have no doubts about that. And that's actually one thing history does show us is most of the time we adapt and we move on.
Because we're encoded to do that through our DNA. I mean, we wouldn't even be here talking today if we weren't all pre-programmed to survive in some way.
Right. I think that there is a lot more research that we could continue to do on especially at this moment in our homes. So we do spend a lot of time looking at commercial environments and studying people's behaviors in public space and in, like I said, workspace and education space or assembly space. We don't spend as much time talking about our homes. And prior to this, I think most people spent 2/3 of their day away from their home. And so I think you're going to see, it'll take some time, but I think you're going to see people sort of returning to the idea of thinking about the home and the impacts of the home, and how we can make it better as well.
I would say, I'd also say, like, with this speed up of evolution, or, you know, the speed up, I've always always worked out of my backpack. I've been able to go for the last 2 years. I don't think I've had a physical office, space. And so I wasn't really surprised. And I've actually always believed that what would you call distributed workforce would be better than having everyone together, because I just thought that everyone together, it just is not as productive, and of course creates some more community. So, this speed up of evolution is interesting. I think it's shown us that we can work in ways that I was thinking we could before, but I think it's also on this other front with the home, it's also speeding up. You read a lot about work-life balance, and I kind of go a different way and say there should be like work-life integration. So now you're starting to, and this helps, I think, with building better relationships. So, I've always kind of tried to take the approach where, I don't hide if I have to go to my son's, coach's T-ball or Little League game and I have to leave at 3:00 or whatever it is. That's just part of my whole life. And then I'll work later in I'm close with colleagues or consultants or others. They know my kids' names and they know, so there's this like integration of life. And I think we're like really hit with it, because you're hearing the dog barking, you're hearing the kid running around, and you're seeing my son's guitar. You're seeing these things. And so now it's forcing that work and life to come together. And hopefully through this process, you're also saying, it's like, wow, man, I really like being around my family more. I like being around my wife. I like seeing my son ride his bike, at lunchtime. That's great. But I also know I got a lot that I got to get done, and I got to be productive. And so how do I do that? And I think that's an interesting outcome, hopefully, of all this.
Can we see your son play the guitar See you, Vince.
Yeah. So he's still air drumming and trying to air guitar and trying to figure it out. And you don't want to see me do it. That's for sure.
So I'm curious, what's been sort of the most not surprising thing, but what's been the coolest or most innovative thing that you've seen out there in terms of how people have been coping, or is anybody out there actually capitalizing on this? I don't know. What are the things that you looked at that seen somebody do and said, wow, that's very progressive?
Well, I think one of the nicest things is at 8 p.m., everyone coming outside and clapping and whistling and cheering.
That's awesome.
I mean, I remember being in Rio for New Year's one year, and there at sunset, everyone comes out to the beach and kind of like snaps or whistles or claps, and I just thought it was so like civilized and nice, and to see that type of demonstration now, especially when so many people need support, is the one that I would I think is the nicest and best.
Yeah, one of our tenants, Land of a Thousand Hills, talked about they have farms in Rwanda, and he talked about the Camp of the Fire, and that at the end of every work day, the whole village comes around the fire and share stories and spends time together. And I think certainly I've seen that our neighborhood's always kind of been built this way, but definitely now, first week everyone's like, we got this, this is great. Then all of a sudden you set into a new normal, and maybe we don't have this, and we need community, and seeing everyone kind of, so long as they're in a trust cluster, they're in this, they know that a lot of people haven't gone out and whatever. Now the kids are out, everyone's kind of standing outside sharing stories again. And so kind of that coming together is really cool to see.
I think it's worth noting, though, if we look at the way that we have built things, there are some communities that are adapting easier to this and do have that ability to stay relatively close in community, but at a safe distance, where they still have, so for example, I live in town and I can still, very close to the street, and I can still see and wave at neighbors and things like that. But we are seeing too, in sparser areas, there is a growing sense of isolation, and that is going to influence our concerns about our mental health, right? So you see potential increases in depression. You're seeing exacerbations of those who have resources, those who don't have resources, and those stresses that are coming and are being we can no longer ignore those, right? So we're seeing, I see those in the schools that my kids are in. We're very fortunate, and the kids have all been able to adapt and move to online instruction. We have friends at another cluster of schools who don't have as many resources, and so their kids have not been able to continue with the online instruction with the same robustness. Georgia State has been dealing with that. I have students who do have resources, students who don't. And I think now that we have more visibility of that, I think it's going to be longer term pressing to really sort of think through how do we solve those so that we do have more resiliency in the system moving forward.
I've been struck by just some really interesting social norms that start to change during this. And one of them's just been the evolution of my only outing these days, is going to the grocery store. So it's like, you don't interact with society anymore to see how people's behavior is really changing, except for, from your home. And as they've introduced new rules at the grocery store, I have a Publix that's really close to me, and the first thing they started doing was, like, I recognized they had somebody that would hand you, they give you the grocery cart and sit there and sanitize it in front of you, and then, like, here you go. but they introduced these one-way aisles, right? And the first time they did it, I wasn't paying attention to the signs and I went the wrong way, on an aisle, and someone corrected me immediately. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what that arrow on the floor means. Because that's so mean, not paying attention. But it's really been interesting because it does make the experience, because there's been some things introduced that says they're not piling on top of you. They're not reaching around you to get something off the shelf like they would normally would. They're not, everyone's being very gracious. And it's actually a little bit more of a pleasant experience than it was, right? Because people are being nice. And I think it kind of goes back to that. We all understand what our number one priority is. No one's complaining about these, the distance that they need to give people, or that you now have to go one way, down the aisle. And I think I think it's kind of nice to see the consideration that we actually can give each other, even in public spaces, because prior to this, a lot of that, and especially in a busy, crowded, densely populated city, some of the social consideration when you were out in public really had gone away a lot. And I feel like it's coming back, and it's actually creating a little bit nicer experience for me. While the grocery store is a little still daunting, because you're like, it's a lot of people have been in here. It's just has a completely different feel, and a consideration is the best word I can come up with it. There's this mutual consideration for other people that I think is enjoyable. And
yeah, just hearing you say that, and particularly relative to, a built space or an interior, I think you could make an argument that the single biggest innovation of the last 6 weeks is tape on the floor every 6 feet.
Yeah.
It's such a cheap and easy thing to do, and it changes behavior,
Right.
in a fairly structural, permanent way. So I hadn't thought about it till you were talking about that, but it's like the first time and now everywhere the first time I saw that, it had to be written on there, spatial distancing. Now everywhere you go, you look for the tape,
Well,
and I think that point is an interesting one around cost. The cost of the tape. That's an innovation. It doesn't cost that much. Well, the cost of where you work. I mean, we were in a high-rise, glass, beautiful, expensive building. We've also now work in a one-story, next to a brewery building at Dutch Valley, and now we're finding that we can work in our house virtually with everyone. Similarly, you look at restaurants or something, and it's really about how that space is configured. You can do it in a lot of different ways, so long as it fosters the right things in community. I mean, look at like a homegrown or maybe Silver Skillet. Those buildings are, I don't say atrocious maybe, but they create the environment and the community that they're trying to there, and they do it really well. Or at least achieve, kind of what people are looking for in those experiences. And so I think with these innovations and things that come, it's not necessarily like a ton of money. It's just really thinking about how people behave and how do we respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the innovation, these things start with prototypes. So like tape on the floor, great. One, I'd like to see better, ways to have tape on the floor. Like, first of all, it's going to become digital. I'm imagining if it's not already somewhere. And instead of like an X, can we do like a question mark? Can we do a percentage, a smiley face? We're going to start seeing that stuff blanketly, including Zoom. I mean, like what we're experiencing right now, not even 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Zoom didn't have security features. Imagine what this is going to look like 3, 6, 12 months from now. And so these are like these incredible opportunities. And as it relates to evolution and Darwin, on his journey, he had what he called these periods of mental rioting. And I think that's a kind of another silver lining here is we all have a little bit more time in the mental riding where these intense moments of creativity. That's going to happen, and we're seeing it like musically, artistically, through design, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, thanks. So we wanted to open up some time for questions. I'm new to moderating this kind of thing, but I'm looking. I don't see any questions in the Q&A tab down at the bottom. But I would encourage anybody that's out there, if you have a question for either the panel at large or for an individual on the panel, now is a great time to get it in. I see there's a lot of activity on the polling that Jesse has been doing.
Can I ask a question to Lawrence? Because I love hearing him speak, and
Sure.
you've been too underrepresented thus far. How is it to be, starting a business during all of this?
Yeah. So it was really funny. So having worked at WeWork before, we always had that tagline. I'm hoping that I have a little bit of a better outcome. But certainly it's a weird time to start a business. But honestly, it's been great. I got one piece of really good advice from my partners that I'm working with, sort of 2 weeks in, where they said, hey, let's go take the business plan and start over and just write it based on the new world rather than what we wrote, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And taking the time to do that and being able to do that without any commitment, honestly, is a lot easier than maybe being an established business. I have a lot of freedom to shift the business model, and so definitely made some adjustments. And then, the biggest thing for me, I had the opportunity to start my business completely on my own or with partners. And I cannot imagine now being in a foxhole all alone. The Parkside guys have been awesome partners, and just having other people in the trenches with you has been great. And then I've hired 2 young people. And what I've really found there is, we talk about how this has changed everything, and I'm sure you guys have seen this. But I feel like whether it's professionally or personally, the 2 things that I'm harping on all the time now are, it is our responsibility. And when I say our, I mean the people that have the means, which we really do, to be 2 things, really, first and foremost, is calm and generous. And so I've tried to bring a sense of calm to every single meeting that I have with my team, to the people that I meet on the street. I live in Kirkwood, which is a great neighborhood, but one that's been transitioning. And I've got 2 or 3 sort of neighborhood homeless guys who work for me from time to time. So I have been trying to be calm with everyone from my colleagues to those folks, and trying to be as generous as I could even imagine. So given my family has a standard, we give 10% of what we make every year away as a mandate. And so, I've tried to just, go way further than that and finding every opportunity. And I think one of the things I've seen for sure is that across the board, across social media, LinkedIn, everything, you're seeing people find more and more ways and different avenues to give back. And I think that, quite frankly, those of us that have the means to be on this call and on LinkedIn, it's our responsibility to take that calm and take that advantage that we have and give back in every way that we can.
Nice.
It's great.
I think I took your question and ran with it a little bit. I'm sorry for that, Gene.
It was amazing.
Gene's a specialist at that. I noticed one of the polls asked how much do you approve of the way that your company has handled things, and that there seems to be a relatively high approval rating for that. I think one of the things that surprised me, I work across different industries and a lot of consumer product stuff and telco and those sort of things. And I've sort of been uniformly impressed by how the attitude that you're talking about there, Lawrence, in terms of long-term. Now, these are a lot of big companies that have, substantial resources and largely can afford to take a long-term orientation. But I've been, as somebody who's worked in crises management over the years, I've been a little bit just really pleasantly surprised at how well most companies seem to be handling that. So Dawn, you have a question there from Mindy Roberts. You want to take that on?
Let
Can
me
you,
find it.
you want me
I
to read it?
see. I well, in terms of it being a collective community, I think it is it's a lovely place. I've been there a couple of times.
Yeah. So the question.
There's a broader question, though. I don't know if it's just to me, but the broader question about how do we think COVID will affect open workplace design? I think many of us could answer that. I think that it's certainly going to have us think through the more complexities of how we work now that we have worked in multiple ways or different ways, and we've used our living rooms and our dining room tables. So we've used work surfaces as well as casual environments. I think it is going to have an impact on having us rethink kind of our the more traditional office, which maybe has only a few different types of ways to work, whether it's in a conference room collaboratively or individually in our workspace or office. So that may generate a lot more questions. I think that there is also, Janet may can speak to this more, an idea of what do we need in an office now in terms of where that's going to head.
Yeah, Janet, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, this is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting results of this world experiment that we've done on let's just move to your home and figure out new ways to work, because we've been talking about new ways of working for a long time. We've been talking, but the funny thing is we still talk about the same things. We talk about, well, conference space and workspace and the break areas. And I mean, we fundamentally haven't truly changed anything about how we think about office in a long time. It looks a little bit different. The furniture is a little bit different. It may be more open, more casual looking, but fundamentally we really haven't changed a lot of our baseline ideas about it. And that's where I think that the question is a bigger one than just the open workspace. I think the question gets much, much bigger, which is starting with kind of where I was thinking before. It's like, well, we've got this technology, the digital workplace platform, that really creates the tools of which we connect, in which we do work, and everything that we can do, a lot of it can be handled through that. And it's really more of, all right, well, let's just pretend we don't even know what office space looks like. Let's just pretend we've never been to an office. We work how we're working today, and that's the only thing we've ever known. And then we have an opportunity to go and get some kind of shared space where we can all come together. And then you say, all right, well, what do we need to do when we all come together, and why do we need to do it? And I think that that's really the first place to start, is to just put as much of a clean slate as you can possibly take. I was on a call with a bunch of other CEOs of commercial architecture firms yesterday, and a number of them had just gone through renewing leases on their offices, and a lot of them have multiple office locations. And they all said, gosh, that was bad timing, because if I were doing that now, I would look at taking a lot less square footage, because I feel like we're gonna work very different. So unanimously on that call, everybody said, we feel like we need less square footage than we've got today, but we're not exactly sure yet what we're doing with it. And so that's my thing, is always, let's start with the right question. And I think the right question is way above, like, starting with our baseline assumptions and then working down from there. And I don't know what it's like. I think
and I would say I completely agree with that. And I think a couple of the questions, I mean, a lot of the goals, right, are you want to be successful, and you think you can get there through collaborative work and how can we be creative? How can we create something new? And I think this social experiment, to what Gene was talking about, is now, bringing into question, well, everyone's thought collaboration, get everybody together and get ideas, or creativity. I mean, so this social experiment now all of a sudden becomes, well, what does it really mean to be collaborative? you know, and you think about that Darwin example, you know, creativity comes from like intense focus by somebody over, you know, of what they're working on. And so, you know, I'd always thought, oh, if you're at home and, you know, hey, I need to get something done, I'm going to leave everybody and work on it, right? Well, now you've got all these Zoom chat, everyone puts it on your calendar. And so like you lose focus because you're still getting hit, even when you're by yourself with all this stuff. And so I think now we're starting to see, like, if you can figure out how to intensely focus, and then collaboration is actually building upon. So some of the greatest inventions were just somebody took somebody else's idea, built a little bit something different on it. So Gene was making the example of well, Paul first said, hey, one of the better inventions right now is the tape on the ground. And Gene's going, okay, well, what's the next guy's idea of how to make that a little bit better and a little bit better? Not necessarily like 10 people sitting in a room brainstorming what's the best way to create, you know, tape on the ground.
Janet, you touched on this just a minute ago, but we've got a question from Rebecca Murray. How do you think technology and digital may start to become more important after this for commercial real estate and design? Lawrence, given your background with WeWork, which a lot of people, you know, which really did change how people thought about workplace. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you obviously have to acknowledge that very clearly technology and digital work has been influencing real estate for you know, more than a decade now, and so I think that's something that is just going to be a continuation. I think what this situation in particular forces, in my mind, is it forces us to reevaluate with different standards. So before, we were all still in the same, you know, technology hasn't advanced in the last 6 weeks, and we were all trying to figure out how to incorporate that. But what this does is it changes the balance and the scales of what you thought about before. So, you know, each individual stakeholder, a tenant having to evaluate how much space they need, how distancing they're going to do for their people, what sort of behavioral things they're going to put in place, landlords thinking about what technology to invest in, what's worth it and what's not, what differentiates my building. All that stuff is in a different lens today. The technology is the same. So some of the things that I've already started working on is there's a company in Atlanta that tracks and traces nurses and doctors and hospital staff and traces their hand washing, basically. And so they can show which rooms they went in and out of, how often they wash their hands, and they can see who they interacted with and alert people to different things. That's been standard in hospitals for a little while now. That technology can be brought into the office environment. And so we're looking at piloting that in one of my buildings. We would do that in the common areas, and we would track and trace our janitorial and property management. And then we would offer that to tenants as an add-on. There's another company that I invested in, a tech company I invested in a while ago that does access control. And they allow you to use your phone, the Bluetooth feature on your phone to automatically enter doors. And if you do that in the right way with destination dispatch elevators or single story adaptive reuse product, there's ways to do it where there's zero touch on somebody coming from their car door to their desk. And I think these are the types of things that all have different costs. To David's point, tape doesn't cost very much and some of these cost a lot. But the lens through which we would have evaluated the value of that 6 weeks ago to now changes. And to me, the number one most important point in real estate today is the value of your physical asset for the last decade or so may have been based on lead score, talent recruitment. It may have been wired score. But for the next 12 to 18 months at a minimum, it is going to be about health and wellness. And it is going to be how well are you taking care of the people that are using your asset. And so I think it's going to force us all to evaluate those investments and best practices.
Thanks, Lawrence. I like that comment a lot, and I especially like that it sort of sets us up for our conversation next week, which is what's the road to recovery look like, and particularly as it relates to a built environment. So I want to thank everybody. We're at the end of our time. They went by really fast. Nobody wants to go bowling with Jesse unless he pays, according to one of the polls. But anyway, I want to encourage anybody, if you have questions you want to submit in advance to us, we'd love to hear from it. We'll be a little bit better and smoother at this next week. But thanks to our panelists. And thanks to everybody else who's participated. You'll be getting more communication this week about next Friday and the Friday after that. So I think this was a good kickoff, but I'm really looking forward to the next two because I think that we're going to get into the tangibility of things as the path to reopening is on us, and it's no longer optional in terms of how we're going to handle it, or it's no longer conceptual about how we're going to handle it. So thanks, everyone.
Hey, Dawn, I have one quick clarification question for you.
Yes.
If we go by your concept of viewing our house in terms of the use that it's providing today, does
Mhm.
that mean that the majority of my house is now a bar?
I
I feel like that's how I'm using it mostly.
Yes, I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people are. That's again part of the multifunctional aspects of our kitchen.
Legoland.
Exactly. We have our own little Lego lands and our own bars and our own restaurants as well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Well, it is Friday, so I'm going to let everybody go. Thanks, everyone.
Ah.
Bye.
Bye.